It slid up. Which conversation you in? It fits up in there. Yeah. It's for Ross. The metal is on that. This road sign is pretty cool. Yeah. It's all it needs. Almost funny. Then when he gets to it.
So does the machine have to be with the welder, or you just taking something?
This I got from someone else
Take that on
Instagram. Well, she is a girl that I was supposed to like post it on her story. I was like, maybe I should do that. And I was like, no, I don't know how you update it.
Rather than moving.
Like, I got one dress, but it comes back to that's why I was selling it. Like, because you can wear like a little like average shirt.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's normally a real big deal, but.
Well, it's fine, but neither one of them.
Do you see that new boutique?
Oh, yeah. It's so thin.
It's expensive. It's like eight vests.
Yeah.
Hey, Gary. But they have like
When you get a chance. Before Gary, are you finished with it?
No, it's just. But it would need to be in my house.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you love that. 15 minutes. Well, I mean, you're good.
But we can both.
Good
morning,
sir.
I am.
Oh, I know what that is. You guys
Give me a hard and fast number.
But I told the lady, I'm like,
Yeah, Walter. Now, what is he doing?
No, I haven't used them, but I hear that already.
We're gonna have to measure it. Oh, everybody.
my one.
Yeah, So this is gonna have to read your signature.
It'd be hard not to. The minute we have to do anything else on a window, you're not doing it.
What you gonna do? So now you don't have it. I should still go.
Huh?
On measuring windows, read a little more over. On measuring windows.
You didn't say that.
Oh, on
You just said-
windows, you
You
didn't
just said
qualify that
something.
with
No,
any.
no.
Said I've ever.
Have a conversation on windows.
I'm supposed to fly.
No. I
Feel
never
it.
been wrong on measuring. So whatever time I was-
Yeah.
You've been all right, okay?
I get my one chance.
We'll let you fly. Yes. I've never been wrong? Nah.
The windows, because I never measured windows before. You always have something.
So you can never be wrong, do you never done?
We put blinds up in windows in some of our rooms.
So I get a free shot still. I still have one free. Okay. Measure blind. Then I can be wrong.
Uh-oh, we're live. All right, so. All right, good morning, everyone. It is a very hot July 10th. Summer is definitely with us. And we left off on page 22. I'm sorry, we did not. I have that sticky. We left off on page 21 with Augustus. So I think today we're going to get through the rest of the Romans, and we're going to go right into who was in Palestine. And it's important that we understand the way the government worked and some of the things that were going on in the government, because that also will help us understand when we see some of the appointed leaders why they may have chose one way or another when they were confronted with an issue. So we're on page 21 and we're in Augustus. So now Augustus ruled 27 BC to 14 AD. So we're definitely now at the time of looking at a ruler that is going to have a direct impact during the life of Christ. So Octavian's, now how did he get into power? Octavian's victories allowed him to become Rome's first emperor. So we think about the Roman Empire, and you may think always emperors, but we see Octavian became the first emperor in 27 BC. And so as emperor, he was also named commander-in-chief of the Roman armed forces. And so that term, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, who do we know today that gets elected by the people? And he also, although he doesn't have the title of first emperor, he does have the title of commander-in-chief. So even our president, when he is elected, he is also the commander-in-chief of the military. So we see that occurring in Rome. And it talks about Augustus literally means the majestic one, a title indicating the esteem the Romans held for him. So now we're going to see a little bit about how did Augustus rule. So he initiated many religious, political, and economic reforms. To administer the far-flung empire, he divided the provinces of Rome into two major types. Now we're hitting a point that this is important because it's going to let us know how the region of Israel was ruled. So the more peaceful provinces, such as Greece, were governed by the Senate and had a leader known as the proconsul, usually appointed for a term of a single year. Gallio in Acts 18:12 was a New Testament proconsul. So now when we see in Acts, we see that name come up, we know a little bit about the policy of the person. So if you're only appointed for a year, realistically, you can't get a lot done, but you can't really mess up too much either, right? So it was for a year appointed term. Alongside the proconsul in these senatorial provinces, the emperor usually appointed another officer, a procurator, who watched over the financial affairs of the province. Now imagine you are given a job by the emperor, and your job is to manage the financial affairs in this far-flung area. And if you would like to keep your job, what do you want to happen in your area? And you want the money, right? We want taxes. We want people with making money. We want people paying taxes. And we're going to want to send that money back to Rome. So there was a motivation factor, too, with being in charge. And that is, if you're appointed, then those who appoint you can take it away. The more resistive provinces, such as Palestine, were governed directly by the emperor and had a leader known as a procurator or a prefect. So if you were a peaceful area, the Senate appointed. If you were problematic, the emperor appointed. And so with that, the prefect retained his office at the discretion of the emperor. So all of a sudden, it's not this every year, the office probably changes person. In a troubled or a problematic area, then the emperor appoints you, and as long as you're doing good, you get to keep the job. So that's another high incentive to make sure that you have to balance the level of, we need income for taxes. I don't want the people to revolt, because then Rome sends the army, and if you're the leader, you lose your job, right? So there's a balance there. So Pontius Pilate served as prefect of Judea from AD 26 to AD 36. So we're going to talk about that in a little while. So, but we know Pontius Pilate, right? So now when we think about him and we see him in the New Testament, you know, the emperor himself appoints him. You get your job as long as you're doing well. And if you're not doing well, you lose your job. The emperor can also take it away. So from a standpoint of the New Testament, Augustus is important because he was the emperor under whom Jesus was born in Luke 2:1. He ordered the census connected with Jesus' birth. So when everyone had to go back to their ancestral area to be part of a census, then that occurred, and that is also what brought Jesus, his mother, to Bethlehem, and that's also where he was born. So we have all of these things working together that God orchestrates for his plan through all of these people, and that's why it's good to see how it's working, how it works. So Augustus could boast that he found Rome in brick and left it in marble. His efficient administration replenished the treasury, restored confidence in the government, and strengthened Rome's influence in its empire. So when we look at our own leaders, we kind of judge them the same way, right? So if you were a leader that replenished the treasury, meaning, you know, we got the country out of debt, and you restored confidence in the government, and you strengthened their influence, that's pretty much a pretty good president, right? So even in today's terms, that we kind of use the same method on who's a good president. If we get a president who spends outrageously, raises taxes, diminishes our influence, and destroys government confidence, you know, he'll be remembered as a not good president. So, but it's good to see history when it talks about Augustus, also talks about his impact in his country and the world, and it is nice to know it's the same troubles that they had back then we still have, and those troubles are the treasury, right? Are we spending more than we're making, or are we making more than we're spending as a government? Confidence in the government. So what happens if you lose confidence in the government? So here, if you lose confidence, you're probably just not going to get reelected, right? But if you're I took the control by force, and you destroy the government, you destroy confidence, and everyone's broke, then you're probably going to get that revolt. So these things are pretty much the same measures today. So at the time of his death, his adopted son Tiberius was chosen to succeed him. Now, the bad thing with picking successors, because you do a good job as dad, does that mean son will do a good job? No, right? Because really every person is measured on their own, but they're also measured in the shadow of the one before them. So Tiberius, he's going to go reign from 14 to 37, and he came to power at the age of 56 after a lifetime service in the Roman government. So you would think he was really good because he's had so much experience. He's not a 22-year-old, my dad just put me in charge of the country. So his haughty, suspicious bearing contributed to his general lack of popularity. In the latter part of service, a series of domestic difficulties and political conspiracies brought out such cruelty in Tiberius that those suspected of the slightest opposition to him often faced death. His death in AD 37, which isn't a long rule, the country, it says, collectively breathed a sigh of relief. So now this person is gone, and the country's not worried about the slightest opposition. If you said something wrong to the leader, that you were going to die. And so most likely, it's not the everyday person that says something wrong that's fearful. It's those in political offices that are a true challenge to a leader. So they also would be even higher up the, I think you're leading a revolt, you have to go. You have to die now. So Tiberius was the emperor during the lifetime of whose lifetime Jesus ministered, died, and rose from the dead. After the emperor's name is mentioned in Luke 3:1, he plays no active part in the biblical story. So it's just noted that he was in power. But yeah, because remember, the Bible is inspired. The Bible is God's word to us. But the Bible is not a history of every single thing that went on. It's a story that we see that shows God and his people interacting. And so God and his people could be the Israelites that we see in the Old Testament. God and his people can be the New Testament Christians. But the story revolves around God interacting with the people, not just a complete history volume, if you will. So Caligula, 37 to 41, another short-lived one. So he experienced high popularity in a series of highly approved political measures. Now think about these measures that make people happy. He released political prisoners. He reduced taxes and provided public entertainment. So, looking at that today, if we have political prisoners, we let them out so they could be politically active again. Reduce taxes. Isn't that an ongoing theme that we would all like? And provided public entertainment. How about if cable TV was free? Everybody gets free cable TV courtesy of the government. Yeah, so, to look at it like, what could you do today? So I don't even think people would be that really excited about free public entertainment if we could have somebody that came in and made a great reduction in taxes. That would really be a crowd pleaser.
What was the entertainment?
Say, we have coliseums, we have all sorts of things, and we can use the coliseums to get rid of unwantables. And so the entertainment's only good if you're in the stands. If you're a participant of the entertainment, it's not going to go that well. So eventually, signs of mental weakness and an oppressive arrogance emerged. He demanded worship as a deity and instructed his representatives in Syria to erect a statue in the Jerusalem temple. So if you erect a statue in the Jewish temple, what's going to happen? So the legate wisely delayed the action until Caligula's death in AD 41. So it's one thing to be told to build the temple that's going to enrage the nation in Jerusalem, in the temple, to build a statue. It's actually another thing to do it. So just like construction today, how many times, when I drive through Missouri, and that's where I'm from, the interstate has been under construction since I could drive. And I could drive in 1980. So, and the potholes, I believe, are getting bigger. And so it's like, when is this ever going to be actually done? Because you drive through other states and it's like driving on beautiful, smooth roads. So even then, there were government construction aims that were delayed for good reasons here, but sometimes just delayed. So his reckless tyranny led to now this is something. His reckless tyranny led to his assassination by a group of imperial guards. No action of Caligula is mentioned in scripture, although his actions may have influenced, but he's not mentioned. And, when you have imperial guards and you have all of these different guards, you're thinking their job is to protect you no matter how bad you get. And here is an example of you're just too bad. You have to go. There's no recall vote. So Claudius is 41 to 54. Now this is another short term. And so at the death of Caligula, the Praetorian Guard, who were the emperor's special bodyguards, appointed Claudius as emperor. And that sounds really odd too. Where was the Senate? Where was all of this? But this is what happened. He had lived in a relative obscurity during the reign of Tiberius and Caligula. He must have been kind of obscure because we know if you were outspoken, you probably died. And this is an oddity too. An early illness, perhaps a form of infantile paralysis, left him with a repulsive physical appearance. A drooling mouth caused some to think him mentally deficient. His appearance was deceptive, for he proved to be far more than an able ruler than his contemporaries would have anticipated. So he was actually a good choice. I mean, they may have made the choice for the wrong reasons, but the choice was still a good choice after the fact. So Claudius made an attempt to restore the earlier Roman religion to a place of significance within the people. The Roman writer, I'm not going to say his name, I'll try it, Suetonius, states that Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome because of some disturbances surrounding one Christos. The expulsion of the Jews affected Priscilla and Aquila, Paul's well-traveled missionary companions in Acts 18:2. So knowing the history about what's going on in Rome also lets us see what's happening with some of the people that Paul interacts with. And so that expulsion, if you're expelled from a country, you have to go. So that's what, it affects Priscilla and Aquila. Do we see that, like I said, in Acts 18:2? So now we have Nero, 54 to 68. So then this is how political intrigue is, and really it's not that great to be the emperor or the king, because the whole time you're emperor or king, somebody else wants the job. And so that somebody else is usually willing to get rid of you to do it. So Agrippa, the scheming mother of Nero, manipulated her husband Claudius into designating Nero, her son by a former husband, as the legitimate heir. Nero came to the throne at the age of 17. That's very young to be, I'm in charge of the empire. His youth made it wise for him to follow older, experienced advisors for the first 5 years. So we're 17. That's like 22. Yeah, so I would have thought you would need a little more time than 5 years, but it says he followed him for the first 5 years. So during the time, he managed to rule with effectiveness. In AD 59, he murdered his dominating mother and assumed full control of the government. Because, like all people in power, if mom is the one that keeps telling you what to do, and you can't do what you want as the emperor, the only way to really stop it, just like we see all over, he had to kill mom. And so mom was murdered. The results constituted a political disaster. So obviously it wasn't well thought out. His careless administrative policies emptied the treasury, and he used violence and cruelty to fill it again. So like any government today, if you are the leader and you totally overspend, and then in order to keep spending, you use violence, cruelty to raise more money, you will not be very popular. And Nero had the temperament of an artist rather than a politician. He read his poetry in public, played the lyre before audience, and sang at public performances. So that type of combination wasn't working well. So now we're going to see why we need to know him is because how he interacted with people in the Bible. So during his reign, a disastrous fire swept away 10 of the 14 wards. And you know, Nero watched while Rome burned. You at least may have heard stories of it. Nero was accused of having the fire set deliberately to provide space for a new palace. Because how do we get rid of all these buildings with people in them if I'm trying to build a huge palace? I don't want to buy it. So the next best is a burnout, and then we'll level the rubble. So Nero accused Christians of causing the disaster in order to divert any blame from himself. He unleashed severe persecutions on Christians after the blaze. Church tradition suggests that both Peter and Paul were murdered during the reign of Nero. So it's suggested because it doesn't actually, it doesn't have a spot that says who killed them or who was responsible or who was in power. But by the time period, it would have been highly probable that they were there. So Nero's draconian measures in government incited a revolt against his rule. So what do you do when you're a politician or an emperor and there's a revolt? You flee, right? Because what don't you want to do? You don't want to die, right? So if faced with a revolt that will kill you or fleeing, you flee. He fled Rome and was killed by a former slave. So the revolt against Nero's authority led to 3 rapid changes of emperors during the years 68 to 69. And order was not restored until Vespasian's soldiers captured Rome and installed him as emperor. And that, once again, will be an important event. So Vespasian was involved in the siege of Jerusalem when his soldiers declared him the Roman emperor. Right? So if the army says that you're the new emperor, guess what? And why is that?
Because they're not, I mean,
they will fight everyone who says no. Yeah, exactly. So it's hard to fight the Roman legions when you're not, when you're not prepared to do it yourself. So now this is important. Leaving the military affairs of Jerusalem in the hands of his son Titus, we'll see, is food ever used as war? Is food ever used as a means in war? We're hearing rumors of it now. We're seeing the Ukraine, grain, all of these things. He proceeded to conquer Egypt and cut off the supply of grain to Rome. And so that, once again, you know, this is not something new that goes on. We see it today with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the vast amount of grain that's not being shipped. And we see it here even in the time of the Romans. So a lieutenant of his set out for Italy, where he captured and sacked Rome. His victory led to Vespasian's assumption of the imperial office. So he must have been well thought of by his men, because his men declared him the emperor, and also fought to ensure that he became it. So as an emperor, Vespasian's strict and frugal habits plucked order from the chaos Nero had caused. He built the famous Colosseum. He died in office in 79 AD, leaving his position to Titus. His name is not linked to any New Testament events, but during his lifetime, Christianity grew rapidly through the Mediterranean world. So Titus, now this isn't in the book. This is also history that affects Israel. It's 79 AD to 81, not a very long reign, but the most important link with the biblical world occurred in AD 70, when he captured and destroyed Jerusalem. His name is not mentioned in Scripture because we really don't have in Scripture a whole book about the destruction of Jerusalem. His brief reign did not allow any opportunity for significant accomplishments, and during his reign, Pompeii and Herculaneum when Mount Vesuvius erupted. So that was a very large event. They have a really good museum there. My wife and I have been able to see both Pompeii and Herculaneum's museum, and it totally wiped out a large area when it erupted. So he wasn't responsible for that either, of course, but it did occur during his reign. So Domitian, 81 to 96. After Titus' death, the Senate bestowed power on the younger brother, Domitian. He was an autocratic ruler who tried forcibly to suppress foreign religions. Ooh, I put a star next to that. Church tradition attributes the persecution of Christians to him, but extensive information on the actions is lacking because there's just not a lot of good material from 2,000 years ago to read, but it is attributed to him. His persecution probably provided the background against which the Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation. So that would give you a time frame. Now we're done with all. We know all the history all the way through. Basically, John writing his book. So now, what we're going to do is, now that we know the big rulers, we're going to go in local rulers in Palestine, and this will help us really see what occurred and why it's important to know who was in power. So in Palestine, the Romans used local rulers to carry out Roman policy. Herod the Great, and a Idumean by birth, was the first non-Jewish ruler appointed to office by the Romans. So remember how there was all this animosity towards Herod the Great? So knowing that he's the first non-Jew, it would also allow you to know, well, why did they not like him so much? And when we look at, now remember, the other leaders can be appointed. If you were in peaceful Greece, you would get somebody appointed by the Senate for basically a year. If you're in a non-peaceful province, the emperor appoints it. So Herod the Great was in power from 37 BC to 4 BC. That's a pretty good time frame. So the political craftiness of Herod's father, Antipater, offered his son a powerful beginning in a political career. So even today, what is one of the things we see with politicians? We see normally it is a political family that's involved a lot of times, where that whole family remains involved in politics. So to pick one, the Kennedys. So how long were the Kennedys in political office? A long time, right? Even from the time when we had a Kennedy for president, but we had a Kennedy in politics. Yes. So these families that we see, even back in the biblical times, if you were involved in politics and you were raised in politics, it was not uncommon for the politics of that family to continue through the children. And so the Roman Senate approved Herod's kingship, but he had to win the office by military means. His non-Jewish background caused most Jews to resent his presence. So that, when you read about Herod the Great, that would be part of that resentment. His capacity for scheming and cruel behavior appears in the biblical story of his slaughter of the children of Bethlehem. And that's in Matthew 2, 16 to 17, right? So not only is he not a Jew, he's ruling the country, as he's installed as a king, which gives him a tremendous amount of authority, enough so that he can slaughter the children of Bethlehem. Herod's unscrupulous character explains his duplicity in dealing with the Magi from the east in Matthew 2, 1 to 12. So to understand more about him, not only was he not liked, he had some political savvy and scheming ability, because what did he tell the Magi that visited? Why did he want to know?
He wouldn't kill him.
Well, no, because but what did he tell them?
Oh, he told him he was going to worship him.
Right. So we see on one end Herod the Great telling these Magi that came to hey, we're looking for the King of the Jews, right? And so he tells them, wow, I want to know too. And so then he asks his own court, and they're like, well, he's going to be born in Bethlehem, and they knew all of the background of where the Messiah would come from. They weren't looking, but they knew it. And Herod is able to tell the Magi, well, bring news back to me on your way out. And we all know the story, and then they didn't, right? And so then we also see the slaughter right after that of the children of Bethlehem. Despite his cruelty and suspicious attitude, Herod had a great administrative abilities. He provided free grain during the famine and free clothing and other calamities, because he still needs the people, right? And the reason he acted against the Messiah birth is because that was going to be a challenge. That was going to lead a revolt that would take back Israel. And if Israel is taken back, Herod the Great won't be the king anymore. So we see him act to preserve his own position, but then when there's issues within the country, he gains some goodwill from the people by providing free grain and free clothing and other calamities. He constructed many impressive buildings and was also responsible for the refurbishment of the Jerusalem temple. Now remember, he's the first non-Jew, and yet he is doing that. The temple was redecorated with white marble, gold, and jewels, and became renowned for its splendor and lavish appearance. Additionally, Herod strengthened the defenses of Jerusalem by building and repairing a sturdy wall around the city. He also erected a new harbor named Caesarea after the emperor, and a fortress at Masada. So I'm happy to say I've been to both places, and I will say I have pictures for those of us here if you ever want to see Masada. It is unimaginably arid in the middle of the desert on a high plateau right above the Dead Sea. It's got a gorgeous view, but the problem is water. And so he built cisterns. I mean, it's a lavish palace. That's why at the fall of Jerusalem, if you ever read about Masada, the Jews held out there for quite a long time, but the Romans are very persistent. So, and there's a trail that goes up to the door, and literally 24 people could have held it off forever, because if you had to walk that snake trail all the way up, you're just going to get picked off the whole time. So the Romans made Jews build a ramp. And you can see it if you go to Google Earth, you can see the ramp. It's still there. And that ramp took several years, and it was going to go right to the door. And they used Jewish people because they were, one, pretty sure that holdouts wouldn't kill their own brothers, their own people, and two, it was a lot of work. And then when they get up there, that's why they had all killed themselves before they would be captured. So part of the, that's like special ops in Israel. That's one of their things with doing a ceremony in Masada is never again, that they're not going to ever fall again. Because Masada was the last holdout. That was the last place that there was Jewish resistance, and you would have thought it was in the desert, it's not worth it, just let him stay there, but no, the Romans didn't do that. So some side reading on Masada is really interesting, but he is responsible for building that. And so all of these projects were underwritten. Now this is the bad part, of course. How does governments have no money? That is something every government shares. Governments inherently have no money. They don't make things. They don't produce things. They consume. So how do governments get money? From you, the worker, right, from the people who live there. That's where you get taxes. So, or that's where you get the money, is through taxes. So all of these projects were underwritten by taxes collected by tax collectors called publicani in Latin. So remember the tax collectors that we really have stories about and we don't like at all. And remember when Jesus had a meal with the tax collectors, what did everyone say? Yeah. What do? You know who those people are? If you're the Messiah, you would know. They're all tax collectors. They're taxing us to death. So, but understanding all of these things being built takes money, and the government has no money, so they have to take your money to do it. And now we have to have tax collectors to make sure you pay. So that's why it's good to know, even, why did they hate the tax collectors and all the biblical references? It never goes, and fortunately the tax collectors showed up. Nobody ever has a verse like that. It's throughout, they're tax collectors. It's bad. Now, Herod the Great has many marriages, 9 or 10 wives, led to unbelievable domestic discord and competition for the throne. So remember we'll read about it. To prevent his scheming sons from disposing him, Herod killed at least 3 of them and at least 2 wives. Because if you're watching politics in this era, you know that whoever you probably say can have the throne wants it a little quicker than your natural death. And so they will help you along. So in order to prevent that, anytime at least 3 of them, they must have been scheming to be in control, and so he had to eliminate them along with at least 2 wives. Now this isn't odd. This is something that, as a practicing Jew, Herod would not normally kill a hog in order to eat pork. The fact that he had no scruples against killing his own sons reportedly prompted Augustus, Caesar, to remark about Herod, "It's better to be Herod's pig than his son." So, so his actions aren't done secretly. They're known all the way to the Roman government, and then they make little comments about it. It's like, it's better to be his pig than his son because he doesn't kill his. And that goes. But see, if you didn't know the background, you wouldn't. Why would they say that, right? But now you find out. Well, he won't kill a pig for pork, but he'll kill his sons if they have aspirations of removing him. So Herod's final days were filled with displays of violence and hatred. He died in 4 BC, most likely intestinal cancer, it says. And Herod's successors. Now, this is 3 BC, so now we're really, it's 4 BC, so we're really into we're crossing into that New Testament era, right? At Herod's death, 3 sons inherited separate portions or parts of the kingdom. Archelaus became ethnarch of Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. The term ethnarch was used to describe a ruler over an ethnic group such as the Jews. He served from 4 BC to 6 AD, when his distasteful rule provoked the Jews to ask Augustus to replace him. So here is a lesson. that we'll look at. If you lose favor of the people, you can be removed from power, right? Just by petitioning Caesar. And why would Caesar listen to the people?
He wants to stay in power.
And if I have to send a giant army down there to get control,
It's gonna cost me money.
it's going to cost me money. So what is the easy thing to do?
Get rid of the ruler
Get rid of the ruler, and I'll put a new one in that makes the people happy, right?
and save money.
And save all the money. So do you think Pontius Pilate knew that?
Yes.
Get the hell out.
Right? Because we see him in power after, so, and where might that come into play with the decision? We see a very public one that Pontius Pilate talked to the people. Pontius Pilate has an opportunity to free two
Free
people,
Jesus or Barabbas, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
And he went with the crowd.
so he went with the crowd and washed his hands and goes, I'm not responsible for this. But at the same time, everybody in charge is at the whim of the emperor.
And that's something that's used today. I wash my hands of this. And that comes from,
Yeah, I'm washing my hands from this, which we know the context of that statement, because that means I'm not taking any responsibility for this. This is, you guys are making the decision. I don't want to be part of it. So, ask him to replace Augustus. His reign over Judah led Joseph and Mary and Jesus to live in Galilee rather than in Judea, Matthew 2:22. So, when we see a move around, even today, people move around for several reasons, right? We move to be close to family. We move for financial opportunity, or you move because of some sort of discord in your country. So those are the three biggies, if you will. And Ukraine now has all of these people leaving the country. And it's not to live closer to family. It's not for better finances. It is because the Russians are taking over. There are countries at war. You see bombings. You see all of this. So migrations, we see Priscilla and Aquila, they left, right? You must leave because of, we're kicking you out. All the Christians have to leave. So there would be persecution. So these big three reasons are still happening today of why do people move. And so if there was a problem and you lived in an area that had a ruler that was very, very bad, and you could just move a little ways away and avoid it, you probably would. So after Archelaus' banishment from the Judean thrones, the Romans generally ruled Judea through a prefect or procurator who was answered to the Roman emperor. Pontius Pilate was in the line of these prefects, right? So Pontius Pilate is ruling, and he has to balance, I don't want to revolt. I still have to get everyone to pay their taxes. And I really don't want to do anything, especially, with the Jews, that would incite a riot and the biggies on that would be something to do with religion, right? Something I'm doing against in Jerusalem with the temple, or in religion, anything that deals with violating their religion. So Pontius Pilate is in this line of prefects, and that would help explain, why he's, even though Jesus is not doing something worthy of crucifixion, and he gave them an out by saying, what criminal do you want released? They did not pick Jesus. So Herod Antipas was appointed tetrarch, a general designation of subordinate rulers of Galilee and Perea, and reigned from 4 BC to 39 AD. John the Baptist rebuked him for divorcing his wife Herodias, for divorcing his wife to marry Herodias, the wife of his half-brother, and that's in Mark 6:17-20. So now we know, where does Herod pop in here at? Jesus labeled him that fox in Luke 13:32, and later stood trial before him in Luke 23:7-12. Herod Philip was appointed tetrarch of, and these are really hard things, Itria, Trachonitis, and Gaulonitis, Oranitis, and Batania. Definitely not within my vocabulary. He was fair and just in his dealings and served in the position from 4 BC to 34 AD, which is quite a long time. Apparently, Herod the Great also had another son named Philip. Philip never ruled any of the territory and is known in Scripture only because he was the first husband of the Herodias whom Antipas married, and that's in Mark 6:17. So the only reason we even have him in Scripture is because in the narrative between God and his people, this person has us popped into it. But the story is never about him. It's just giving us information on his, what he did when he popped into the story. 2 later descendants of Herod are also important because they are mentioned in the Bible. Herod Agrippa I, grandson of Herod the Great, executed James the Apostle and imprisoned Peter, and that's in Acts 12. He served as king over all of Palestine before succumbing to a tragic death described in Acts 12:20-23. A great-grandson of Herod Agrippa II became the tetrarch of Chalcis and the other territories in AD 50. He is important as the Agrippa before whom Paul gave his dramatic testimony in Acts 26. So we can see these people that were in power and were had a biblical portion where they interacted with God's people. We see how many of them are very related, right? And now they can go back to even grandparents. So now we see Agrippa is who Paul gave his dramatic testimony in Acts 26, but now we know that is like a family line that he keeps interacting with. So we're, yes, ding. So we are going to stop here, and we're almost at the conclusion. So I would ask, as you get ready for next week, we're definitely going to chapter 2. And chapter 2, now that we've built how all these people are intertwined politically and how it led to the rise of the Romans and the governments within Israel, next we're going to talk about life in the New Testament so that we understand some of the background on what it was like to live there, to understand some of the stories a little better. So we're ending on page 26. And David, if I could have you close us.
Dear Lord, thank you for allowing us to be here this morning to study about how the history worked in with the biblical teaching that we follow, and how the leaders were there and they played a role, but you were the orchestrator of it all, and they didn't see how they were fulfilling what you needed to be done. But we are, it is very interesting to see how you worked it all out. We just pray that you will help us to take these things from history and be able to apply them to as we study the Bible. Pray that you will be with those that are in our congregation that are sick, those that need a touch from you for other reasons, that not a physical sickness, but just mental stuff, or remain hard on them, and we just know they need to be lifted up. I just pray that you will be with us as we prepare to go to West Virginia this coming weekend, and pray that you will be with us as we work up there trying to share the gospel with a community that does not have a church home right now. Hope that we are able to plant a seed and you will help it to grow if that's your will. Pray all that we do will be in your will. Pray that you will lead and guide us. Be with us as we go down into the worship service. Be with us. Brother John brings the message. All these things ask in Jesus' name. Amen.